Ian is the founder of Greenie Web, and he's going to talk about sustainable web design.
All right, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone, right? So I know the Z monster is hunting some of us, right? So I saw some of you nodding off just now, but don't worry, it's just me, and then a quick panel, and then you're off for tea break. All right, so I do know that I'm standing between you and tea break, so I'll make this a bit more snappy. All right, we'll do one or two non-technical things. This presentation is just meant to be more general in nature so that everyone, whether you have a technical background, non-technical background, you can appreciate it. You can understand why Thibaut, Aman, and now myself are so passionate about digital carbon emissions and what that means for sustainability in technology. All right, so just a quick run through of what we're doing today. So I'll just do a quick run through of myself, and then we'll go to the basics of digital sustainability. After hearing Thibaut's session and Aman's, I think that part might not be too necessary already, but we'll still go through that. And then we'll talk about something that you're all here for, right? Design sustainability. How do you actually bake in design, tech, and sustainability together? And then if we have a bit of time, we can do questions, or we can go to the panel, and then you can ask your questions during the panel, because I'll be there as well. Okay, so a bit of Greenie Web. So we kind of started back in a long time ago. I'm not sure what you guys were doing in 2009. That was when Lehman crashed, right? So we kind of started off as a side project back in 2009. And ever since, we have been working very hard to really be the voice of sustainable digitization, as well as digital decarbonization in Asia Pacific. All right, so first question, and this is something that I guess has been answered already. What is a digital carbon footprint / digital carbon emission? So a DCE or DCF is essentially the CO2 we put into the atmosphere each time we use an internet-based or digital-based product or service, right? So if you want to really simplify things, it's the amount of CO2 you put to the atmosphere when you send an email. It's the amount of CO2 you put in the atmosphere when you watch a, Netflix video, when you watch something else on your YouTube channel. So that's what a digital carbon footprint is. And this is what we call the DEC nexus, right? So Thibaut touched on it, Aman touched on it, but I'm trying to really synthesize it in the schematic behind. So if you don't remember anything, just remember this, because this is really how what we call a digital carbon emission is produced, right? The idea here really is that every time you use a device, right, you talk about layer one, which is on my right-hand side, the data layer, the device layer. All of these processors do consume energy, right? Because when they are sent, all these data packets are sent to a data center, one of three things happen. Either A, there is storage, it's like iCloud or some of the other storages in private servers. Number two would be processing, and you can immediately think of Bitcoin mining, right? The processing of very complex algorithms. And the last thing that happens would be, well, retransmission. So sending back those messages that you send to someone, sending it and making sure that it actually reaches the third party. So these things are very important and also very energy hungry. So my colleagues have already talked to you a bit about this. And for those who didn't know, Singapore actually banned the building of new data centers from 2019 until the end of last year. So that's how big a problem it is even in the local context in Singapore. Because data centers consume so much energy, and now we are in this mad rush to increase energy supply, right? That's why we're getting energy from other countries. We are thinking of getting energy wired all the way from Australia here. It's because of the large amount of energy consumption we have for data centers is really that immense and growing at that fast a pace. And that really leads us to the last portion here, right? The power plant that you see. So in Singapore's case, 97% of all our power is supplied by Senoko, Tuas power plants, right? They run on natural gas. And what that basically means is that you have a carbon cost to it, right? It's not green, it's not even brown, right? It's dirty fossil fuels that are powering each and every one of our TikTok videos, our YouTube videos, and our messages. And that's really a problem today, because when we talk about the greenhouse gas emissions that we put out into the atmosphere, it's actually already larger than every airplane, airline, and airport combined, right? So you always think of, well, the aviation, big tech, being very separate. We think that aviation is very pollutive, and we think that tech is very green, right? But that's actually not true. And that's why we're here today, because the amount of greenhouse gas that we put in the atmosphere will grow by about 300% by 2040, which means in less than 20 years' time, right, when we're still all here, right, maybe in the 30th or 40th API day, the amount of greenhouse gas we put in the atmosphere would have tripled by then. And that's also a problem when we look at it from an energy perspective, because it's about 9% growth on an annualized average basis. Right, so one of the things that I got, and this is by the Mozilla Foundation, is that based on their research, communications tech, which is basically what we've been talking about, will emit more carbon by 2025, which is basically 2 years' time, than any country, right? Any country except China, India, and the US, right? So it's a huge amount of CO2 we're putting in the atmosphere, and this is basically something that Greenpeace came about in a study a couple of years back, right? So in the graph here, you can see what are the best case scenarios and what would actually be expected, right? Basically, if things were to happen status quo. The idea here, and this graph basically shows you the amount of energy usage, right? Electricity usage by the tech industry, if we basically go full green, which is the solid line. So there'll be an increase of about 5 to 10%. But if we don't, and that's really the present day case, the amount of energy consumed will increase by up to 20% by 2030. And that's a very high number. All right. So then it brings us to this question, right? What can we do about things, right? So two things. Number one would be sustainable digitization. And sustainable digitization is this very 0 to 1 concept, right? Whereby you build new software, you build new processes that are green in nature, right? So it's sustainable digitization. The second thing we can do is for current infrastructure, and that's the concept of really digital decarbonization, whereby you look at your current systems, you look at your legacy systems, and you think, what can we do to make it better? So those are two concepts that we want to basically have a quick run through today. But before we do that, since this topic today is on sustainable design, right? So the question that I want all of you to ponder right now is, as a designer or as someone who might work with someone else in UI UX, how can I play a role in reducing carbon footprint, okay? And so we're gonna look at 3 design choices that are very small yet very impactful, right? So the first thing we're gonna look at is animation speed. The second thing we're going to look at would be basically having a weight budget, right, for your web page. And the last thing would be something very common, that of user journey. All right, so let's go to the first. So in this slide behind me, you basically see 5 different speeds, right? So it's not very clear, but on the extreme right is actually a cheetah, and that's why it says very fast. Number 2 would be a horse, and that's fast. Number 3, normal, would be actually a cat. Number 4, right here, you can see a tortoise. And number 5, that curl there is actually the shell of a snail, right? So this picture right here basically is supposed to show you the speed in relation to animals, right? And this speed that you see below, right, 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds, these are all page loading speeds, right? So the time taken to comprehend animation on a web page, right, on a website, is about 150 to 350 milliseconds, right? And one of the things that we realize, to our surprise, is that there are some web pages whose animation speed is actually 100 milliseconds. In other words, if you are visiting that web page, you cannot really discern that there's an animation there. It's just gone, right? So it's just so quick. And for other web pages, we see that the animation rate is about 500 milliseconds, which basically lets people think that there's a lag in the system when it was actually intentional. So this graph here shows you how animation speed really is very, very important when we look at first user experience and also sustainability, right? Because if you have an animation speed that is too quick, you're basically wasting data packets for an effect that no one will see. And if you're having it too slow, what happens is that people think that there's a problem with your website when there actually isn't, right? So having an optimized animation speed can actually allow you to give people that good user experience. At the same time, it allows you to save carbon. Right? So I put in brackets right there, know who your page's main demographic is because In the 150 to 350 range, there's actually quite a big range, right? It's 150 milliseconds to about 300, 350 milliseconds. The idea really is that if your demographic is someone younger, then you can actually tailor it more to the 150 side, right? If your basically site is meant for people who are more legacy users, then you can put it towards the ending, about 350 milliseconds. So you want to tailor it to your demographic to make sure it's carbon efficient. So the second thing is set a page weight budget for design, right? So you see this scale here is very interesting, right? It doesn't show you kg, it shows you 4.3 megabytes, right? So every web page, right, comes with what we call a weight budget, right? It's not just people eating a lot. Your web pages also consume a lot of data, they consume a lot of energy, and they also emit a lot of CO2. So what you want to do is you want to really budget, right? Have that carbon budget for your web page and divide that accordingly for each site that you have. So what that means really is that you can see that for example, your landing page, if you want it to be more fancy, then you allocate a larger budget to it, right? For other pages, maybe the FAQ page, something that isn't as important, then you have a smaller budget for it. And then I wrote at the bottom, right, that over half of the users will leave a mobile page if it does not load in 3 seconds, right? So what does that have to do with a budget, right? So the idea here is that if you stick within your budget, you have a very low, low data use page and a very decarbonized, low carbon site. And what that basically means is that your site will move faster and your bounce rate will actually get better, right? Don't quote me on that. That's what Google said. And so the last thing would be optimization of user journey. Okay, so once again, we're going to talk a bit of bounce rates here. And the idea really is that if you have a poor user experience, you're going to get a very high bounce rate, right? Which is something that all of us as developers, as people in the tech industry don't want. So how can we combat that, right? The first thing is don't let people don't make your website a maze, right? Maze is an M-A-Z-E. Because very often people in the tech community are so concerned and so focused on developing new products, new features, new things for their web page, that they don't realize that they're creating this very, very convoluted digital world whereby not everyone will know how to navigate through, right? And the idea is that if you can go through a certain piece of information on a web page in 2 clicks, that's more carbon efficient than if a person has to go through 20, 30 different clicks and clickbacks to reach that particular piece of information, right? So what happens is that if you optimize for the user journey, you're actually optimizing for the page's data usage, you're optimizing for the person's user experience, you're optimizing for less energy consumption and ultimately less carbon emissions. So that's another thing that you want to take note of. And now as an individual, so I know some of you aren't in the digital world, so what can you do to play a role in reducing your digital carbon footprint? Right? So this thing isn't very technical, right? Something that everyone can do. So the first thing on my right-hand side is check your subscriptions, right? So I'm not sure about you, but I know a lot of people who, when they open their emails, they have like 1,253 unread emails, right? Half of it from Shopee, maybe another half from Q10, and something from, I don't know, a shop that you bought something from 10 years ago, right? The idea really is that every year, there are billions to a trillion, depending on who you ask, spam emails or unopened emails, right? So what that basically means is that you have a carbon cost for all of these emails that go to all of us, and that is something that we are personally responsible for. So it doesn't matter that you aren't a developer. If you are still subscribing to emails that you don't open, and if you're letting it accumulate, you are also contributing to a digital carbon footprint problem, right? So for something that is very low effort, very easy is to just click the unsubscribe button. Don't worry, they're not going to hunt you down, they're not going to scold you. It's really doing your part for the environment. Number 2, right? Send links and not attachments. So this is something more for the corporate world. So a lot of people in the corporate world like to send large, chunky attachments and you CC everyone. You CC your boss's boss, you CC your boss, you CC your boss's enemy, and everyone, right? You want to let the whole world know you're doing some work. And that's good, right? But the problem is that that's also very carbon intensive. And most of the time, people don't open those attachments. Only 1 or 2 relevant people do, and that's that. But there's a carbon cost attached to the email attachments that you send to all the other people who never open that email, right? So one of the things that we do prescribe for people as a best practice, more often than not, is that to cull down the number of people in your email thread, especially people who aren't relevant, and where possible, to send links instead of attachments. The last time would be to optimize video consumption patterns. And this really is the era of people moving on to streaming, right? Spotify and the like. So one of the things that people like to do, at least people in my generation and the generation above, is that people like to go to, say, places that stream videos, right? YouTube and the like, to listen to, songs. So that is not a problem in itself if it weren't the fact that the music video will usually play when you're actually listening to a song. So you basically turn on the music video and you hop onto another tab to do your work, right? So one of the more carbon efficient practices, right, is to actually use a streaming platform instead, right, rather than hopping onto YouTube for every single video. Another thing that people can do if they still use YouTube is that there's some of these alternate, I'd say, channels that provide you basically blank text, right, and just the music at the background. That works about the same. Okay, so just a couple of pictures before I wrap up. So this is basically Despacito. You probably have seen this video before. And in circle in red, right, is basically the number of views, right? So someone wrote, right, and this part is a bit iffy, but the basically logic is there, is that with 5 billion views, the particular video would have used as much energy as 40,000 American homes in a year, right? And if you look at the totality of videos that we have, and with the rise of video conferencing, this number can actually power a country, okay? So the second concept I just want to dabble a bit on today would be dark data. So a lot of us here, and I've talked to a couple of folks here, are in the AI world, right? So you do a lot of data collection and the like. And the idea here is that every piece of data you collect that isn't labeled, isn't used, isn't processed, is what we call dark data, right? It's just sitting there in your storage, and it's very problematic. The reason is very simple, right? When you have data just sitting there, it uses storage processing power, consumes energy, but because you don't use it, you just keep it there for 10 years, then there is really a lot of wastage in terms of the idle capacity spent to process all of these dark data. All right, so this is just a chart that I found online that seems very interesting. So I just want to draw your attention to this part right here. So you see here training AI networks, right? So all of you here probably would have used ChatGPT. So ChatGPT, the carbon footprint is different, right? So this one is just talking about training of an AI network. So we're talking about GPT-3, which is like the predecessor, right? Now it's GPT-4, and it previously was 3.5. So GPT-3, it emitted about 85 tons of CO2 per training, which is about the amount of CO2 that can be sequestered by about 8,500 trees, right? So one of the things that we need to be very cognizant of is that it's not just the usage of, products and services, but very much the building of these products and services in the digital world that can contribute greatly to our CO2 footprint. All right, so how can you be involved, right? 3 things, very simple and very straightforward, right? Always ask. All of you are coders, a lot of you are developers, some of you are also in leadership roles. Ask what your organization is doing to combat this problem, right? The main problem we face nowadays is not really a lack of willingness to do things, but generally a lack of awareness, and sometimes pure ignorance, right? That people don't really think about this, and that's why nothing is done. Number 2, always speak, right? So give feedback, mention topics about sustainability in the digital world, and ensure that people around you are aware. Last but not least, always act. And here's just a plug for the Global Alliance for Sustainable Digitization for Youth that my company is currently pushing. We're going to launch it in Q3 this year. So if any of you are basically interested, feel free to hit me up. All right, so interested to hear more? We are conducting an Earth Day session. It'll be towards the end of April, and we'll be at ATX SG this year, right, as well. So that's the end of today's quick presentation. I hope I didn't bore you out. And if you're interested to connect with me, feel free to scan the QR code at the back. Thank you very much.